When I was developing Crack the Case, I wanted to think through every aspect of the case interview and think about the good candidates, the ones who really just did an awesome job on the cases, seemed flexible, enjoyed solving problems, had a mind that could handle anything you threw at them. And I realized one of the problems was memorizing frameworks and trying to spit out just the right framework for the right time. It typically indicated someone who had waited to the last minute, didn't really prepare, wasn't a very good problem solver, and wasn't very flexible. So I developed something called the maximum value model. The chart looks like this, and honestly, it's going to look a little crazy at first. But the idea is to have zones of a flow. There are 5 zones altogether, and to think about where the case problem might be starting and where it could go next. Let me walk you through the zones at a high level, and then we'll talk about these more in the Crack the Case workshop. The first is zone 1. It's the strategy zone. This is where we're going to think about, are we increasing or growing the size of the business, maybe changing directions, shrinking by getting rid of a piece of the business, or just doing nothing, staying the same. The second is where we're going to find the revenue and cost. I call that the operations of the business. A lot of you will think about operations and think about distribution and processes, but I'm thinking about just the numbers of the business. What are the numbers for revenue? What are the numbers for cost? And can we calculate profitability and think about the customer's demands at that point? The third zone you probably won't find as often for a lot of your cases, but you might touch on it. It may not be the main point, but that's the organization. What's going on with the senior leadership? What's going on with the processes? What's going on with the actual, details of the systems? That's why you'll see a little character here. It looks like a little man who's measuring something. The head is for people, the backbone are systems, processes are the legs, and then the measuring stick is how do you do metrics? And then lastly is this fourth zone across the bottom is for finance. When you think about what's happening with cash, the balance between debt and equity, a lot of cases won't emphasize that in the beginning, but it could come up later on. Now the fifth zone is specialty. Now specialty covers a lot of topics like suppliers or competitors, the economy. And these are reminders that not only are they broad topics, but they tend to affect a lot of the areas below. Now I've heard everything over the last few years about the MVM. I've got people who love it and others say, you know what, it's just another framework, it doesn't work for me. But don't miss the main point of this. And the main point is that you need something that's broad enough and something that you use regularly enough that you can think in an integrative way. The advantage of using something like this is that if someone gives you a case that starts out dealing just with profitability, you can quickly think, what about the big picture? What are some of the strategic issues I want to consider? What's happening with the organization and finance? And what are some other issues? As you do more cases and you use something like this, a centralized integrated framework, you'll be able to move your mind around much more quickly. So we'll talk about this more in the Crack the Case workshop. I'm going to encourage you to come up with an integrated way of thinking. I'd love it if you use the MVM, but if you want to use some other approaches, that's good too. But avoid memorizing about 15 different frameworks and instead focus on one that you know really well that can keep you flexible.